Hey guys, it's me, Mr. Plazik here. This video series is going to deal with photosynthesis is what we're going to talk about in this video series. It may seem like a very complex process. I'm going to break it down to you relatively simply in terms that you can understand. But basically in photosynthesis, the major job of photosynthesis is for plants, some bacterium, and some protists have the ability to make their own food. So in photosynthesis, we're going to use light energy to aid in the process of sugar production is what we're going to do. So a photosynthetic organism has the ability to produce their own food. We don't have the ability to do this. We have to go get our food from some external means. We have to go to the grocery store, etc. But some bacterium, plants, and some protists have the ability to go through the means of making their own food. And that's what basically photosynthesis is. So let's get started. So this is what photosynthesis is. It's the conversion of energy stored in sunlight into usable forms in the form of a carbohydrate, which is sugar, that the plant, protist, or bacterium is going to produce. This is probably one of the most important chemical reactions on our planet because it allows our planet to sustain life. We have an organism that can produce its own food, and then we feed off of those organisms that have the ability to produce their own food as well. So this is a vitally important chemical reaction that goes inside of these particular organisms themselves. This is the chemical equation for photosynthesis. So what's happening is basically the plant's taking in carbon dioxide, okay, and it's also taking in water. So we're taking in carbon dioxide and water, and with the power of light, all right, we're going to break some of these bonds, and we're going to basically have the ability to produce C6H12O6, which is glucose. And as a byproduct of this reaction, we're also going to produce oxygen that's going to be released. And this oxygen that's released is vitally important to us because we take in oxygen for a process called cellular respiration, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Make sure that you understand this equation. This equation will be on the quiz that you're going to take. This is vitally important to know this important equation. Again, we're taking in, the plants are taking in carbon dioxide with water, the power of light energy. They're using this to help produce glucose and oxygen is what's going to go on. This sugar that they produce can be used for a variety of things inside the plant, whether it's going to be to provide structure, energy storage. They could take this sugar and go through cellular respiration and use it to produce ATP as well. So again, describing photosynthesis is taking in this light energy. We're converting this light energy into chemical energy is what we're going to do. Kind of think of a plant, the leaves of a plant, kind of like a solar panel. We know if you have a solar panel on your house, it's converting that sun's energy into electrical energy. In this case, we're going to take the actual light energy, collect that light energy, and convert it into chemical energy in the form of a carbohydrate. Remember, this is going to happen in plants, some bacterium, some protists as well. But all plants go through photosynthesis, some bacterium and some protists. Protists were those organisms that we took a look at when we did that pond water lab, when we looked at those organisms underneath the microscope. A lot of those guys were protists that we took a look at, and some of those protists that we took a look at were photosynthetic. Plants are going to need to take in CO2 and H2O. They take in CO2 through the atmosphere. They get the H2O a lot of times through their root system is where they're going to get the water from. This is going to take place in the chloroplast, and it's going to use a pigment called chlorophyll. And that's what I'm going to show you next. So if we take a look here at a leaf. So this is a leaf that's right here that we have of a plant. All right, when I blow up this leaf, it's composed of a ton. If I take a little segment of this leaf and I blow it up, it's going to be composed of a whole bunch of these cells. Remember, plant cells have cell walls. Inside that cell wall is a cell membrane. So this is the cell membrane. And we have a variety of organelles that are located in here. There's going to be a nucleus. There's going to be a vacuole. There's also going to be another organelle that hangs out. And it looks a little bit like this. This is that key organelle that we call a chloroplast. Okay? And this is the organelle that's going to be responsible for photosynthesis. So I'm going to blow up this chloroplast right here. We're going to take a look at this chloroplast even bigger. We're going to take a look at it. So I'm going to blow up this chloroplast, which is an organelle inside of this plant cell that's responsible for photosynthesis. So if I were to take a look at this chloroplast at the inside of it right here, it's going to look something like this. And it's going to have a whole bunch of these little tiny flat-like, cookie-like structures. They almost look like little tiny Thin Mints for those of you that eat Girl Scout cookies. Okay. These little tiny Thin Mint-like structures are called thylakoids. So this is a thylakoid that's right here. Okay. And we have more thylakoids that are hanging out over here as well. They're kind of stacked upon one another. The space surrounding these thylakoids is called the stroma. So this space that's all right here that I'm coloring in is called the stroma. Okay, so we kind of have an understanding of the structure of a chloroplast. Again, each one of these little guys is called a thylakoid. Okay, a stack of thylakoids is called a granum. And then the space outside the thylakoids out here is called the stroma. This is where the two major reactions are going to take place as far as photosynthesis is concerned. So we're going to have two major reactions that are going to take place. One's going to be called the light reaction, and the other one's going to, one's going to be called the light reaction or light dependent reaction. The other one's going to be called the dark reaction or the dark independent reaction. Okay, it's also called the Calvin cycle is what we're going to take a look at. But this is where these things are going to occur. Now I'm going to take one of these thylakoids and I'm going to blow them up even more. So I'm going to take one of these thylakoid structures and I'm going to blow it up even more. And we take a look at a thylakoid. It too has a little membrane that's on the inside of it as well. And inside of this membrane is where I find chlorophyll. Okay, so chlorophyll is going to hang out inside the membrane of a thylakoid. So this is going to be my chlorophyll. Is where I'm going to find that. Okay, this is that particular type of pigment that's going to capture the actual sunlight. So this is the actual solar collector is inside the membrane of the thylakoid where I find this chlorophyll is where we're going to have this actually happen. So that's where the first reaction takes place, and this first reaction is going to be called the light reaction or the light dependent reaction. All right. So when I take a look at the light dependent reaction, okay, the light dependent reaction or just the light reaction in photosynthesis. All right, the light reaction, what's going to happen is inside of this little thylakoid-like structure, okay, what's going to happen is light's going to hit it. So light's going to hit this thylakoid. So here comes light. So the first thing that happens is we have light that hits this. Okay. And the process of light hitting this thylakoid structure is it charges up this chlorophyll molecule itself. Water's going to be inside of here as well. So H2O is going to be inside of here. And this process of light coming in, we charge up, okay, light charges up the chlorophyll molecule, we split water, okay, so in the light reaction, we're going to split water. What are we going to split water into? We're going to split water into hydrogen, and we're going to split water into oxygen is what's going to happen, okay, we're going to split water into hydrogen, we're going to split water into oxygen. This oxygen is going to leave the plant cell, okay, this oxygen is going to leave the plant cell, it's going to leave the leaf, and it's going to go off into the atmosphere. Well, we're going to use oxygen for cellular respiration. This hydrogen is going to get carried, okay, to what they call the dark reaction, okay? As well as in this process, ATP is going to be produced, okay? So ATP is also going to be generated. So ATP is also going to be generated in this process, and these two things are going to get carried over to the dark reaction. Okay, how ATP gets built is you have broken down ATP that's called ADP, okay, and basically through conversion in this process, ADP gets converted into ATP, and we know ATP is cellular energy. This hydrogen gets carried by a molecule that's called NADPH. So NADPH is going to carry, okay, this H at the end is a hydrogen, is going to get carried over to the dark reaction. So the NADPH and the ATP are going to get carried over, okay, over into the stroma. Remember, if this is my chloroplast that's here again, these are the thylakoids. This is where the light reaction occurred. This space surrounding the thylakoids is the stroma. Okay, so this is the stroma. All right, so that's where the stroma is at. This is where the dark reactions are going to occur. So the dark reactions occur in the stroma. And the reason they call them the dark reactions or the light-independent reactions is because light is not required. All right, so in this dark reaction, what's going to happen is we're going to take in CO2. The plant takes in CO2 from the atmosphere. All right, we're going to run it through a cycle, okay, with the power of ATP. All right, with the power of ATP. Remember, we got ATP from the light reaction. So CO2 plus this ATP, okay, and we're going to add hydrogen to this as well, but we're going to run this through something called the Calvin cycle. All right, we're going to continually run this through the Calvin cycle, and what we're going to produce is C6H12O6 as a result. So this is how we're going to produce sugar in that process. So as a result of this, we're going to produce sugar that way. That's what's going to happen. I'm not going through every single step of the Calvin cycle, guys. Just know that this occurs in the stroma, where we're going to take CO2, ATP, and these hydrogen ions. We're going to run them through a cycle, okay, and we're going to add these atoms together to help produce sugar, is what's going to happen. That's what's occurring in the dark reaction. Okay, so as a product of, okay, as a result of this process, we've produced sugar and we've produced oxygen as well. All right, this ATP that was produced is going to be used to run this Calvin cycle, is what we're going to do. One of the reasons we need this ATP is to be used to produce the Calvin cycle. Okay, what the plant does with sugar is a variety of things. Okay, when we look at a plant itself, it's composed primarily of carbohydrates. Okay, so it's built of these subunits, these monomers that we have, okay, of these sugars. We build them together to build complex carbohydrates. And we learned that earlier on in the year. All right, some of this sugar might be stored in the plant. When you take a look at a fruit, if you eat fruit, that's high in sugar. Okay, how was that fruit made? Well, that fruit was made by a process of photosynthesis to get all that sugar to surround that particular seed itself, is what's going on. So that's the basics of photosynthesis. So this is the first step of photosynthesis. This is the second step. Let me go to the first step of photosynthesis. This is the first step of photosynthesis that we have. It's called the light reaction. And what I just told you guys is the very first thing that happens is that we're going to capture this energy, this light energy, in the chloroplast and the pigment called the chlorophyll, which is located in the membrane of the thylakoid. All right? The plant's going to take in water through its roots, and we're going to split water is what we're going to do. So the very first thing that we do is we're going to split water, okay? After this light gets captured in the chlorophyll, we use this energy from the light to break water. Remember, when we break water, we have what? We have hydrogen left, and we have oxygen left. All right, we're going to all take this hydrogen with the hydrogen carrier called NADPH, and we're going to carry that over to the dark reaction. As well as during this process, ATP is built, okay, from broken down ATP that we call ADP. All right, so we're going to carry ADP, and we're going to carry this hydrogen over on into the dark reaction. Okay, oxygen is going to leave the plant cell. Okay, it's going to leave the plant cell, and it's going to go off through the leaf into the atmosphere, which we're going to use to go through cellular respiration. Now, a plant can go through cellular respiration as well. A plant may have to go through ATP production too. So the plant's going to release this oxygen through the stroma. It's considered waste to the plant. They're going to use this hydrogen produce energy, ATP, to be used in the Calvin cycle. Okay, so hydrogen and ATP are going to be carried over to the Calvin cycle that we call the dark reaction. So the dark reaction, okay, here's what's going on in the dark reaction itself. All right, so we have this CO2, and we have the hydrogen with ATP, and we're going to run this through the Calvin cycle, and we're basically going to generate sugar is what's going to happen in the dark reaction. So the goal of the dark reaction is going to be the sugar production. In the light reaction, we have water getting broken down, ATP is being produced, oxygen is being released. But the major goal of the Calvin cycle is to combine this CO2 with the hydrogens, okay, and powering it by ATP in order to produce sugar. All right. Now this sugar is going to be used for a variety of things inside the plant. Okay, it's going to be moved through the plant. It's going to be moved through for the roots to the stems. It's going to be used in the production of fruit. It can also be used for cellular respiration in the plant itself. When you eat carbohydrates, a lot of times you're eating plant products. All right, because the plant made this sugar is what it does. So those are the two basic steps that you have to understand are the light reactions and the dark reactions of photosynthesis. That's as simple as I can make it. That's as simple as I can make it. I didn't go step by step into everything that happens into the Calvin cycle. Just kind of understand the dark reaction. We're building sugar by combining CO2 with its hydrogen ions and the power of ATP, and we're running it through a cycle, adding other chains of molecules to this as well to help aid in this process to produce that sugar itself. There are some factors that can affect the rate at which photosynthesis occurs. Okay, so that's the next thing that we're going to take a look at, is some factors that are going to affect the rate at which photosynthesis occurs. So some factors that affect the rate at which photosynthesis occurs is going to be temperature, light, and water. All right, so this is a question that I could ask you tomorrow, is which one of these following graphs represents the effects that temperature has on photosynthesis? So the effect that temperature has on photosynthesis is going to match up with graph C that's here. Because what happens is plants operate at an optimum temperature, and then if it gets way too hot, the plant is going to die. Okay, so we can see here's cold temperatures, the plant's not going to survive, or the photosynthetic rate's not going to be that high. As we get to a temperature in this range here, the photosynthetic rate thrives. As we get to like intense temperatures that are like super, super hot, all right, the plant begins to die off as well at very, very, very high temperatures is what's happening in that graph. So that one probably is best represented temperature. Light intensity is probably going to be best represented by this graph here, A. And the reason that's graph A here is because we only have so much chlorophyll inside of the plant, and only so much light can be absorbed by that plant. Once all those chlorophyll molecules are used up by having so much light exposure, you can't crank out a higher photosynthetic rate as a result. All right, so we only have so much chlorophyll to go around, so we can have an increased light intensity. Yes, it's going to speed up the photosynthetic rate, but eventually we saturate it with so much light and we only have so much chlorophyll that nothing else can be done, so it kind of stays steady at this particular pace itself. Now the next one that we have is water, and I don't really like this water question, but I'll take it, okay, because sometimes you'll see this on exams and things like that. Now if I have like a little tiny duckweed plant, okay, the amount of water that I put surrounding that duckweed plant has no effect on it. Okay, so that duckweed plant is probably going to represent something like this one right here. Okay, it's probably going to represent something like that's right here. But there are some plants out there, like if you take a look at an oak tree, if I were to completely drown that plant and submerge it into water, that graph would look more like C. But if this is an aquatic plant, exposing it to increased levels of water, it's going to represent this A graph more than likely. If it's like an outdoor plant that you guys know as trees and things like that, increased water exposure eventually will kill that plant off itself. So I can see how this water one could be graph A or C, and that's one of the debates I got in with some of my colleagues, is trying to figure out, okay, what effect does, if I have increased water? Well, if it's an aquatic plant, it really doesn't have as much effect that if it is if it's like a tree that lives in the soil and stuff like that, per se. So those are the three things that can affect the rate of photosynthesis. Okay, are temperature, light, and water. You're going to be asked a similar question to this tomorrow to be able to match up these particular graphs with which one represents what. So why is this so vitally important to us is the next question you're going to ask. Much like, why is photosynthesis so important to us? We can't make our own food. We're we're heterotrophs. We cannot make our own food. So we must get our own food from plants, okay? And plants are normally the first we can get our food from plants, we can get it from other animals and things like that. But as far as the food chain is concerned, plants are producers. They have the ability to make their own food. So they're normally the first step in the food chain. And if you remember previously, if we don't have that bottom layer that's here, you can't have other organisms that are on top or above that primary producer standpoint of the food chain. So they're vitally important to the food chain because they're the producers in the food chain. And they're also going to give oxygen to the earth, okay? So they're also a reason that we have oxygen on the earth is because of plants going through this photosynthetic process. We can take in that oxygen and use it for aerobic respiration to help produce our ATP, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So that's why plants are vitally important to us because we cannot make our own food. We have to get our food from another source, and we also need oxygen to be able to live. I know often I always say plants, but you know, it's plants, it's some bacterium, it's some protist as well. So the next step that we have in this particular process is just talking about the pigments. Okay, so the major pigment that we have is chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is going to absorb red and blue light, and it's going to reflect green light, which is why leaves appear green. Leaves look green because they're reflecting that light back. During the fall and winter, this chlorophyll begins to break down, and you begin to see the other pigments bleed out, which is why you see that red and blue, not red, but you see like that red and yellowish color that you're going to see associated with the leaves. So that's photosynthesis for you. Don't forget to finish up that review guide that I gave you guys. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to come see me. This is an easy quiz for you, an easy way for you to do good, to start out doing well on this particular 9 weeks is to do well on this photosynthesis quiz that you're going to take. I'm available. Like I said, if you have any questions, just remember, photosynthesis, we are producing sugar. There's two reactions that are occurring. There's a light reaction. There's the dark reactions. And that light reaction is going to take place inside the thylakoid, in which light's going to be used to be added to that chlorophyll that's going to give it energy, and we're going to break water into hydrogen. Oxygen is going to be released. We're also going to produce ATP. And the dark reaction, which occurs in the stroma, we're going to bind CO2 with hydrogen and ATP, run it through a cycle that we call the Calvin cycle in order to produce sugar.